by Jake. I am your political host, reporter, and commentarist. And this is the show for Friday, March 15th, 2024. And welcome everybody to the show. We've got a lot to talk about, and so let's get started. Now, I want to talk about the State of the Union a little bit, and I want to talk about why the right hates Biden, and these are the Republicans, and these are people who, honestly, for the good of society, literally even for the good of humanity, for the good of the nation, and for the good of the world, these are people who have got to be defeated. They're all the same, every single last one of them. And I realize, speaking diametrically and sweepingly like this, that people may look at this and I may lose credibility, but, I'm sorry, this is my story. I'm sticking with it. If you want to go, if you don't want to listen to this, I've got nothing else for you. I'm telling things the way I feel they are. And if you don't want to listen to this, go to some Clear Channel station and listen to the dead Rush Limbaugh. They're playing his reruns still on those stations. But they're all the same. Every single last one of them is a sellout. They're a party of imposters. It's a party of people who pretend to be what they're not. And it's always interesting to see, for example, someone like George Santos, who of course is no longer in the Congress, but George Santos, who basically represents this fakery and doesn't really try to hide it. But the others are basically through these groups, these caucuses, and through these outward appearances and ideological disguise, as it were. They come to Capitol Hill, they come with a mob like they did on January 6th, and there were those of them who were in the halls of power, as I say, who were supporting that mob, and they were of that ilk. But they say, oh, now we're going to solve the problems of inflation, we're going to solve the problems of immigration, and it's just a lie. Right now, the MAGA party is just that. Arguably, you could say that the entire Republican Party is that, but definitely MAGA is that. And the purpose of the Republican Party is, and always has been, honestly, this stuff is not new. It's union busting, it's deregulation, it's tax cuts for the rich, it's tax cuts for corporations. You will hear, for example, this contradiction that they will say, if they're in trouble, no cuts to Medicare, no cuts to Social Security, no cuts to the safety net. But that's not really what they think. And it's the opposite of that, if you allow them in power, that they are going to do, which is to destroy, which is to privatize Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, S-CHIP, WIC, and all of these other vital programs. And these social safety net programs, there are huge pots of money in these social safety programs. And as I've talked to you, as you've heard me talk to you before about oligarchs, there are some people who, like most of us, we want to make money, but our needs and our desires are limited. They're not the same as some oligarchs who they live for money and they live for power. And they see these, and it's amazing, it's outrageous, the arrogance and the hubris to think that they would actually even go after Social Security and go after Medicare and go after Medicaid and go after all these other vital programs, that they could actually go ahead and get those monies. But that is what they want. Privatizing the Postal Service is another example. The Postal Service budget is a huge budget. They want that budget. They want to take it away. That's always what they do, and they want it for themselves. So the idea of the Republican system, for example, moving on here, is that you had declining real wages in the United States. You have had this. You've had this since 1975. And if you're a Republican, for example, your job is to pretend as to how, if you get in power, you're going to do something about that. And in essence, you either do nothing or you do the opposite. Now, I want to talk about the State of the Union a little bit, and I want to talk about why the right hates Biden, and these are the Republicans, and these are people who, honestly, for the good of society, literally even for the good of humanity, for the good of the nation, and for the good of the world, these are people who have got to be defeated. They're all the same, every single last one of them. And I realize, speaking diametrically and sweepingly like this, that people may look at this and I may lose credibility, but, I'm sorry. This is my story. I'm sticking with it. If you want to go, if you don't want to listen to this, I've got nothing else for you. I'm telling things the way I feel they are. And if you don't want to listen to this, go to some Clear Channel station and listen to dead Rush Limbaugh. They're playing his reruns still on those stations. But they're all the same. Every single last one of them is a sellout. They're a party of imposters. It's a party of people who pretend to be what they're not. And it's always interesting to see, for example, someone like George Santos, who of course is no longer in the Congress, but George Santos, who basically represents this fakery and doesn't really try to hide it. But the others are basically through these groups, these caucuses, and through these outward appearances and ideological disguise, as it were. They come to Capitol Hill, they come with a mob like they did on January 6th, and there were those of them who were in the halls of power, as I say, who were supporting that mob, and they were of that ilk. But they say, oh, now we're going to solve the problems of inflation, we're going to solve the problems of immigration, and it's just a lie. Right now, the MAGA party is just that. Arguably, you could say that the entire Republican Party is that, but definitely MAGA is that. And the purpose of the Republican Party is, and always has been, this stuff is not new. It's union busting, it's deregulation, it's tax cuts for the rich, it's tax cuts for corporations. You will hear, for example, this contradiction that they will say, if they're in trouble, no cuts to Medicare, no cuts to Social Security, no cuts to the safety net. But that's not really what they think. And it's the opposite of that if you allow them in power that they are going to do, which is to destroy, which is to privatize Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, S-CHIP, WIC, and all of these other vital programs. And these social safety net programs, there are huge pots of money in these social safety programs. And as you've heard me talk to you before about oligarchs, there are some people who, most of us, we want to make money, but our needs and our desires are limited. They're not the same as some oligarchs who they live for money and they live for power. And they see these, and I mean, it's amazing, it's outrageous, the arrogance and the hubris to think that they would actually even go after Social Security and go after Medicare and go after Medicaid and go after all these other vital programs, that they could actually go ahead and get those monies. But that is what they want. Privatizing the Postal Service is another example. The Postal Service budget is a huge budget. They want that budget. They want to take it away. That's always what they do, and they want it for themselves. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and one of the things we do here at Twain is that we show people how to start a business, people who have started a business, and people who are in the middle of business operations, how to set things up in the very best way, because here at Twain Consulting, we feel that if you start right, it's easy to go right. So, okay, now all you people out there, have you ever tried to get a business credit line? If you did, what's one of the unpleasant things that you found out? Well, I'll tell you. You found out that the only way that you can get business credit on your brand new corporation or your brand new limited liability company is if you personally guarantee each and every single loan, each and every single commercial credit line. Now, let me ask you this question. How did that make you feel? If you're like me, I would feel like they were giving with one hand and taking away with the other. If this bothers you, I encourage you to go to my website, www.jakelaw.me, where I talk about this and several other important products and services that can benefit really almost all people listening to the sound of my voice. And I also encourage you to call me at 573-454-1168 so we can talk about this, get mad about it together, and see if there isn't some sort of solution. That's www.jakelaw.me. That's JAKELAW.me, M-E. That's www.jakelaw.me, and the phone number is 573-454-1168. So the idea of the Republican system, for example, moving on here, is that you had declining real wages in the United States. You have had this. I mean, you've had this since 1975. And if you're a Republican, for example, your job is to pretend as to how, if you get in power, you're going to do something about that. And in essence, you either do nothing or you do the opposite. So let's say a few words about the State of the Union. Of course, we're, more than a week away from it by the time this show airs. One of the things that we will be talking about on this show, and that I'm going to talk about briefly here because President Biden brought that up, is January 6th. January 6th is something that unfortunately has been fading from the memory, and I think that they're purposely done. I recently heard a statistic that 31% of voters in swing states have never heard of some of the things that Donald Trump has said, which are outrageous, and one of which President Biden in the State of the Union brought up when he stated that Vladimir Putin in Ukraine should do whatever the hell he wants. In other words, President Biden called out Donald Trump, who said that Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, or that Vladimir Putin should do whatever he wants, whatever the hell he wants in Ukraine. And Biden called him out. Biden said, this is crazy. He called him out for this, and I agree, and I think that all right-thinking people will agree that it is ridiculous to have someone who's seriously being considered for the office of the President of the United States to bow down in this way to a Russian dictator, and a bloodthirsty, blood-soaked Russian dictator. And similarly, it's ridiculous for a political party to align itself behind someone who bows down to a dictator. So what Biden said to the assembled members of Congress was that there are some people here who seek, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but this is pretty close to the words that he used, there are some people here who seek to bury the truth about what actually happened on January 6th, which is even more heinous because some of the people who are doing it are the people who were there, and they're sitting there now, even as Biden was speaking to them. And I agree with this. And I agree, furthermore, state that this was a conspiracy. This was a combination of like-minded individuals that wanted to bring out the overthrow of the United States of America by overturning a illegal election. This was a secret combination in the classic sense. And that there are people sitting in the federal agencies and in the halls of Congress who aided and collaborated and were a part of that secret combination, they must be rooted out. And as Biden stated, the truth must come out about what actually happened on January 6th and who was actually involved. And I can only hope that Jack Smith, and I actually, I have confidence in Jack Smith. I mean, I think his choice of venue for the Florida case was a little bit crazy, and I talk about that later. I mean, the case belongs in D.C. I'm veering off the subject here, but stay with me because this is interesting. The case belongs in either D.C. or New Jersey. That's where it belongs. Somehow it wound up in Florida, and it wound up in Florida, of all places, it wound up in Miami. Now, let me point out to you, for those of my listeners who are not aware of this, there's a perfectly good federal district court in West Palm Beach. It's right there. And yet, somehow, Trump was able to get it, or Trump's attorneys was able to get it put into Miami. And not only that, but once he got into Miami, and this is called forum shopping, by the way. You think your case is going to be better received in a different court. And generally, this is illegal. You can't do it, but it is tried, and it's called forum shopping. So they got it down in Miami and not in West Palm Beach. And they got it down amazingly. And if you know the courts, the way the courts work, judges are selected at random. But amazingly, Trump got a MAGA judge, Eileen Cannon, and she's a MAGA judge. And not only that, she was appointed by Trump. And of all the random, and I'm not going to count the judges in the Miami district, of all the judges that he possibly could have got, surprise, 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 he gets Eileen Cannon, who he appointed. What are the odds? And by the way, I'm stating absolutely, positively, this is my story, I'm sticking with it, that Eileen Cannon was A, appointed by Donald Trump, and B, is partial to Donald Trump, because she believes politically the same way that he does. All you have to do is to go online and see photos of her wearing a maggot hat. Now, there's a rule in most state rules, and the federal rules like this, and I'm reading from right now, the federal rule says any justice, judge, or magistrate judge of the United States shall disqualify, and this is Eileen Cannon, she's a judge of the United States, shall disqualify themselves in any proceeding in which their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. They shall also disqualify themselves in the following circumstances: where they have a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party, or personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts. That isn't the case necessarily. And I ask you, they're supposed to disqualify themselves if there is even the appearance of partiality, and they must recuse themselves. It's called recusal. The device is called recusal. Do you think that a judge that was appointed by a president who later, when he is not a president, comes before you in a case, do you think for that judge to take that case is the appearance of partiality? Do you think the fact that the judge politically believes in the movement or the candidacy of a person before it, do you think that that's the appearance of partiality? Well, apparently Eileen Cannon doesn't think so. I just wanted to point that out. Hi, this is Jake with Twain Consulting, and I'm back again to talk to you about one of these little wrinkles that can cause a lot of problems and a lot of happiness and a lot of dismay and a lot of disillusionment for people who actually want to own a business, or who have just started a business, or who have actually created a business entity like a corporation or a limited liability company, or who have been operating a business now for some time. It doesn't really matter. My guess is that each and every one of you people who has done something like that is going through this right now, and this is what I mean. You wanted asset protection. That's why you got your corporation. That's why you got your limited liability company. That's one of the reasons for starting a business. You wanted to grow wealth, and you wanted to protect the wealth that you created. And you thought that a limited liability company or a corporation would be the way to do that. But did you know that just creating a corporation or a limited liability company does not guarantee that at all? How does that make you feel to hear that? If you're like me, that'd make you feel pretty dismayed, pretty angry, pretty disillusioned. Do you want to know why? Do you want to know if there's any way to fix that? Well, go to www.jakelaw.me. That's my website. That's JAKELAW.me. www.jakelaw.me, and watch my video where I talk about this very important thing, and then set up a time where we can have a phone conference, or call me directly now at 573-454-1168. That's 573-454-1168, and let's talk about that. Let's get angry together, and let's see if there are any solutions. Once again, that's www.jakelaw.me or 573-454-1168. But otherwise, honestly, I think he's been doing good. And I must say, I can only hope that Jack Smith, wherever he is, and he seems to be, I'm persuaded that he's considerably concerned about this. And hopefully we can have prosecutions about this that will pursue these and lay the blame wherever it is found. And this is something that it's not popular, and it's not something that we like to think about, that our elected officials are involved in something like this. But the fact of the matter is that those who are sitting right now, as my voice is going out over the airwaves, who are sitting in the halls of power, aided and abetted this secret combination, and they sit in those halls still. And one of them was sitting behind President Biden, occupying the role of Speaker of the House, and that is Mike Johnson, who is all set to support the fake electors in the attempt to overturn the election on January 6th. But I would hasten to point out that he is not the only one. I will list those who I think are the ones, or some of them. There are a lot of them, but I will list some of the key ones that I can list. I won't do that now, but I promise that I guarantee you I'll talk about that in shows to come. The truth must be found out. It's essential for our governmental system. We almost lost our governmental system on January 6th. And I just hope Jack Smith will do that. And like I said, we'll have more to say about that in the future. And, honestly, a lot of us, and I know I have, and I think there are a lot of people out there in the country, and this was one of the great things about what Biden did in the State of the Union. He did it in the first 7 minutes. We feel the same way, and we have been begging our political leaders, nonpartisan, let the Republicans do it if they want, but they don't want to. Liz Cheney is about the only one, and Mitt Romney, who would stand up and do that. Romney is a senator. He gets 6 years, so he was not up for election, so he was safe. Liz Cheney, of course, is a member of the House. She has to be reelected every 2 years, and you know what happened to her. She got primaried by a nobody. And I think that the rest of the Republicans took a lesson from that they weren't going to go against Trump. But we've been waiting for a statement from our political leaders ever since January 6th, and with some exceptions, like I said, Romney and Cheney, we really haven't gotten it, and my hat is off to President Biden for really calling things out and letting everybody know that, to use the old saying, he knows where the bear sleeps. So, all right, we've had the State of the Union, and we've talked a little bit about that, and I would like to segue from that into the whole idea of the State of the Union 2024 and how Biden really knocked it out of the park. And I mean, he really did knock it out of the park. But I want to talk to you about why the right hates Biden so much. First of all, the people that you see in Congress who are, and you'll excuse the expression Republicans, I use the word loosely, they are not the people. They are the shills behind whom are the people who really hate Biden. And I want to present you with this premise, and it's very important, in my opinion. If you don't like this, like I said, go listen to the Dead Rush Limbaugh. They're playing his reruns on various stations. I've got nothing for you on that. If that's what you want to listen to, if that's what you want to believe, go ahead and believe that. But what I want to do, what I want you to keep in mind, is that there's a real struggle, and it's an ongoing struggle for the economic heart and soul of this nation. The people are opposed by, and that's you and me, that's you guys out there who are listening to this, by what can be called the elite, the money power, Wall Street, oligarchy. And the second premise that I want you to think about is that this relates to the first, and this is that they never quit. They never stop. There is no era of good feelings in these people. They are there always to press their advantage wherever they can find it, and they are unalterably opposed to the American system. That they will use it, certainly that's true. They'll use it to make their fortunes. They take the roads, for example, and the infrastructure that have been built using the taxes of the American people, and they will make their profits on it, and then they will, A, pretend they own it, and B, try to make it so that they don't have to pay their fair share of taxes. They do this all the time. This is what oligarchs do. This is what the rich do. But they're opposed to it because it tends towards freedom. It tends towards an economic egalitarianism. And they are completely opposed to this. And the third premise is one of the things that they have wanted to do, and it failed. And what they wanted to do was implement a killer austerity, what I call killer austerity, upon the people of this country. In doing so, this will create a great misery, a great immiseration, if you will, among the people. I want to be clear, they're completely okay with this. Their attitude is better than me, and actually their attitude is worse than that, which is why it is appropriate, among other things, to call them elites, because they consider themselves to be above you, and they are not adverse to doing harm to you in order to perpetuate to that. And it is very clarifying and helps you make sense of what is going on in the world today if you internalize these concepts. If you don't, you will remain confused about what's going on. You will look around you at the freak show, as I have described it, that is going on literally daily, not only domestically, but nationally, but internationally as well. But then again, of course, that's why I'm here with Politics by Jake, so I can try to impress upon you that these things are basically principles. They're fundaments that you need to understand. They are underpinnings. They are not pie in the sky. They are not wild ramblings. They are not vague musing. What I'm telling you is the way it really is. Okay, so, and we've seen this. We've seen this in the State of the Union for 2023. We saw that. We saw the same thing in the State of the Union 2024. Just a lot of hate for President Biden. So the thing, of course, we would want to ask is, why is there such hate? Well, the reason is because, and once again, you have to understand this, because the people in Congress, they are not the people. It's the people who are behind them. It's the people who fund them. It is the people who pay into their candidacies and into their campaigns so they can continue to be in office. They're a little mess of pottage, as it were. And they want certain things. And these are things that ordinarily you and I wouldn't think of so much. And we wouldn't think that their point of view on this and that their desires are so simple. We would like to ascribe them to more philosophical, more deep points of view, but they're not. They're really easy to understand. So the reason why there is such hate, well, the reason is because Biden and the Democrats, through their policies, have turned the tables on the wealthy elites and thwarted their attempts to impose this killer austerity. And I assure you, I mean, just take it to the bank. I'm being as sincere about this as I can be. This is what they want. It's a cycle. And I'll explain this as you listen to this show, and I fill you in and I fill in the gaps about this stuff more. It's a cycle. It's something they do all the time. As Ron Klein, Biden's chief of staff, said once, I don't think he's his chief of staff now, another guy is. I don't like him very much either. Quote, Biden has delivered the largest economic recovery plan since Roosevelt, the largest infrastructure plan since Eisenhower, the most judges confirmed since Kennedy, the second largest health bill since Johnson, and the largest climate change bill in history. Biden and the Democrats, through their policies, have imposed something that is actually little known by Americans today, which is called the American system. And the American system is essentially, and this is the great thing about the internet, you can look this up, you can read it on Wikipedia. It is Hamiltonian economics. It is a set of measures that outline a coherent program of a national mercantilism, government-assisted economic development. It is industrial policy, which, among other things that could be mentioned, stands for the premise that the profits from a business need to be reinvested in the business. And that is not what happens in oligarchy. Oligarchy, among other things, is simply a vehicle for the enrichment of the few at the expense of the many. Without digressing too much on this, we saw, and this is going back a ways, the problem with Southwest Airlines, which had a collapse of sorts around the holiday season, not last year, but I think it was the year before that. And the reason that they did, which they actually even, kind of admit, which is, outrageous, is that they're not putting the profits of the business back into the business. They are simply enriching the officers and the shareholders. You have heard me talk about this with regard to the media outlets. On the other hand, and the reason why the media talks about the things that they do, the reason why they report the things that they do, the reason why they don't talk about the things that they do, and the reason why they don't report the things that they do not report. On the other hand, getting back to my original point, industrial policy dictates that focus be put on the manufacturer, on agrarian, on heavy industry, and basically anything that is going to provide mass traction economic benefits for everyone, not just for the few who happen to be in the position where they can take advantage of the profits from their particular enterprise, and also not on speculation, such as hedge funds and other like vehicles, of which there's far too much, far too much. These things are anti-capitalist, because they seek to absolutely positively minimize and insure against risk. And one of the defining points of capitalism, as Adam Smith wrote in his book Wealth of Nations, is risk. You can't be a capitalist, according to Adam Smith, unless you're willing to take risk. If you don't accept risk, you are not a capitalist. But what you are, you're an oligarch. And so what we're talking about here, getting on with this concept of Hamiltonian economics, is protectionism, which is simply put a policy of protecting domestic industries against foreign competition. It's dirigism, which basically we would define as an economic planning and control by the state. And this is another thing that I want to make, because they wanted to do this. They wanted to smear Biden, but it hasn't worked out. They kept trying to do it, but it hasn't worked out. And I'm telling you about, you may think, oh, they've got plenty of money. Why would they be banned? They're mad as hell. They're mad as hell. This is another thing that I want to make an observation on. In 1941, there was 15% unemployment. And by the end of 1941, unemployment had just about ceased to exist. And this was because of Lend-Lease. And that's exactly what's happening now. And say about it what you will. And the Fed, doesn't like this at all. And talking about the Fed, boy, whole other show. We're just going to touch upon that in passing now. But the Fed doesn't like that at all. Because, for example, why do you think that wages have been static since 1975? The Fed doesn't want rising wages. So in 1941, unemployment, as I was saying, had just about ceased to exist, and that was because of Lend-Lease. And of course, Lend-Lease was the United States using industrial strength to create military ordnance, to create munitions, to create vehicles, tanks, so on and so forth, and transport them to the Soviet Union so that they could fight against Nazi Germany. And this is actually exactly what's happening now. And say about it what you will, but this has been a large and significant factor in changing the economy and thwarting the desires of the money power to impose a crushing austerity and immiseration. And once again, this is what they wanted to do. They want to do this to you, and they will keep trying, and they will never stop. This austerity and immiseration upon the people of the United States and upon the world, and possibly to even do a default. And this has basically avoided chaos. Unemployment, which at the time of the original Lend-Lease in 1939 had been essentially wiped out in the United States due to the combination of the defense industry on the one side, is now in this current state of affairs reduced to its lowest level in 54 years, or in other words, in around 1969. Now, I hasten to add that in one way, this is not maybe the greatest economic, or I should say, this is not the greatest observation to make, because it's based on war. I mean, it is. It is based on the globalist economic notion, which is the notion that brought people like Putin to power to begin with, him and his kleptocratic friends, to rule Russia, and who are nothing but criminals. Nothing but criminals, as I've said before. And they are savage criminals at that. They are bloodthirsty criminals at that. That they were going to do that is, these oligarchs, this money power, and allow these criminals into the global economic system because it was the interest of those elites to do so for their own benefit, for their own bankrupt philosophy, which hasn't worked and doesn't work except to exalt the few over the many and relegate the many to this economic immiseration that the country and the world has basically been suffering under a long time now. And so they decided, and this is attributing to them morals, which I actually don't think that they have. But nevertheless, they decided that they would look the other way and realize that although these people were all criminals, that it was to their economic benefit to let them into the global system. And that is what it was, and this is what it has wrought. And in fact, it has wrought this right from the very beginning when Putin, the head criminal of this enterprise, was allowed into power in January of 1999. Once he did this, or I should say, once he was allowed into power, he immediately began to arrange what can only be described as a part of that organized criminality, including warlike activities. And when I say that, I'm referring, for example, to Chechnya, and all of the subsequent depredations which he has committed upon his neighbors. And naturally, this is not the world I wanted. Why I'm for the American economy. I have no desire to see it happen in this way. But this is what has happened. And one of the ways that has been allowed as a consequence of this world is the solution of a 21st century Lend-Lease arsenal of democracy implementation that has actually played a big role in thwarting the intent of the oligarchs, the money power, the Wall Street elites, etc. And I assure you, they are not happy about it. The rug has been pulled out from under them. They're still trying to understand just exactly where their well-laid plans, which were about to come to fruition, went wrong. And may I say, may they always go wrong, to the extent that they want to elevate the few over the many, economically as well as in other ways. Now, one of the things I want to talk about, although this is a little dated, I want you to bear with me on this, because this is a poll that came out before the State of the Union address. It came out on Wednesday, and it's the Emerson poll. And the fundamental number on the Emerson poll, and this, like I say, this was back on this past Wednesday, but the Wednesday before, was something very interesting. And this is going to lead into a larger segment that I'm going to do on polling, that it's just really important going into the election to understand, because you're listening to so many people report so many polls, and they all have Trump leading. I'm going to talk to you about why that is, and I'm going to use this poll as an example of why you maybe should not be thinking about things and being led by these people who say that Trump is leading in all the polls. So in this particular poll, which I say is a week ago last Wednesday, Biden and Trump were tied at 45% apiece. And remember, this is the day before the State of the Union, like I said, and an additional 10% went to uncommitted or undecided. And the way Emerson does their polling is really pretty good. When someone says that they're undecided, they are pressed to give an answer. And when they did give an answer, this is when some really interesting things began to happen. When they were pressed to give an answer, the final number came out to be 51 for Biden and 49 for Trump. Now, this is significant because Trump had been ahead in this particular poll since last September. That's September of 2023. So this is really pretty significant, what I'm reporting here. Some of you have heard me talk about polling, and I don't really have a very good opinion of polling, and we'll be talking about that, like I said. But Emerson is actually pretty good. In my opinion, it gets an A- in the 538 poll of polls. But this is the thing with Trump, and this is the kind of candidate Trump is. Trump is a certain kind of a candidate. He is a cultural populist. And when you have a candidate like this, he has to have his base come out for him. He can't do it without his base. And this is one of Trump's weaknesses. So, for example, the speculation is on this, and this is just what I've had my ear to the ground on this. The speculation is that part of the reason for the results of the Emerson poll on Wednesday might have been because Nikki Haley had left the race on Tuesday night. And there's some speculation that Republican voters are switching their vote from Haley because Haley's no longer in a race. They're switching their vote from Haley to Biden because they don't want Trump. And this is really significant, as I said, because this particular kind of populist candidate that Trump is relies on his base. He's got to have it. And so, in other words, here's the significance of this. If he loses 30% of these voters, and I'm talking about even if he loses 20% of these voters, then in November, Biden gets 400 electoral votes. This is pretty significant, and it's an important thing to look at. Now, this is interesting. Here's another thing. When voters under 30 are polled, you have the undecideds, and when they are pressed, guess what happens? They break 58% for Biden and 42% for Trump. And this, by the way, is something that the Biden campaign has been insisting all along is what would happen when you get down to the independents. And, arguably, it's the undecided, it's the independents that resolve elections anyway. They're the ones that decide whether they would come in and who they were going to vote for. And in this case, it showed that they shift for Biden by 2-1 or maybe by 3-1. In other words, Biden's not going to just get the undecided and the independents. He's going to get them massively. He's going to get them in droves. And part of this is because these independents and these undecideds, I think they had sticker shock. I think they did not believe. I really think that they did not believe, even though she wasn't doing well. I didn't think that they believed that they were going to be faced ultimately in 2024, which is something that I tried to tell everybody in 2021. They were going to be faced with the same decision that they were going to have to go with Trump or Biden in 2024. And finally, when on Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, when they found out that Nikki Haley withdrew from the race, they finally realized it at this point. This is conjecture, but just go with me on this. They finally realized it at that point for the first time. This may well reflect the Emerson poll results of that Wednesday morning. And now, of course, I'll report to you further, since we're getting on, and that basically the two candidates are no longer putative. They're the candidates. Biden is the candidate for the Democrats. Trump is the candidate for the Republicans. And there's going to be a lot of polling out. I want to keep you guys honest on this, and I want to see if I can't inject some sanity into the craziness that is polling. As I said, we're going to be talking about that later. And so you'll be hearing more from me on this, but that's basically what it is for now. So once again, the results of that independent or that Emerson poll indicate that independents and undecideds are breaking 63% to 27% for Joe Biden. Now, going on further on this polling, keep in mind that almost no news organizations are talking about this Emerson poll, and you're not really going to hear about it. Because you have to understand that in polling, like I said, we're going to do another segment in a moment about that. You have to remember that news stations, and this is crucial, this is really crucial to understand. And I would realize if you would listen to this and you would think, this can't possibly be true. But I assure you it is. News stations, news media outlets have been co-opted by something that I call oligarchy. And you could just, if you want to, you can look at that word and you can say rich people. If you don't want to say oligarchs, you can say rich people. But not all rich people are oligarchs. It's been co-opted by rich people or oligarchs who don't mind spending millions and millions of dollars to purchase a radio station, for example, or to purchase a TV station, for example, and then purchase media personalities to get their message out. This is nothing to them. Okay, now, as I promised, we're going to talk a little bit about polling. We're going to talk about some polls, which you have probably heard of. And we're going to go into that a little bit, and I'm going to give you my opinion on it. And I hope that you would pay attention to it and kind of adopt it or internalize it, or at least give a little place in your mind where you can think about this. Because I think this is important, because there's a lot of polling out here. All of the polling out there seems like it's breaking for Trump. And as I said in the last segment, one of the reasons why it's breaking for Trump is because these stations are all owned by oligarchs. One of the issues that people do not understand is that there's a lot of red herrings out here. People argue about communism all the time. They argue about capitalism all the time. It's not that. The real issue is oligarchy, basically, versus the rest of us. And I'm reminded of the movie Gangs of New York, where the character played by Leonardo DiCaprio all of a sudden realizes that he's actually not just got a little ragtag gang, but he can mobilize them and he can have an army. Well, oligarchy understands that, and they don't want that. And so they will do anything that they can to distract you and dissuade you from understanding your real power. They understand your real power, holding the sacred franchise of the vote, the lowest common denominator of our democratic republic. They understand it very well, but they try to distract you and persuade you that you either don't have the vote, or if you have the vote, that actually you should vote for them or vote for their candidate. And oh, it's not us, the oligarchs, it's some different candidate, it's some outsider, it's some political outsider, it's some rebel, like, Donald Trump with his sweetheart deal with the New York Federal Reserve, and his sweetheart deal with the New York media, and his $2 billion or more of free publicity in 2015 and 2016 in the campaign. And yeah, right. So this is the kind of thing that you're dealing with. And one of the ways that they do it is through the use of polls. And that's one of the reasons why I'm talking to you about that now. Okay, so let's talk about, for example, Real Clear Politics. Real Clear Politics is a right-wing organization. It simply is, and its poll is what is known as a composite poll. Rasmussen, which is one of the polls that Real Clear Politics uses to create its composite, really not a poll. It's a push, called a push poll. It's a kind of call, which is like, it's a telephone call. It's how they do it. It's called a push poll. Trafalgar is similar. There isn't really actually any actual polling going on as we would like to understand, or we would hope to understand polling. It's more like political telemarketing. No one is collecting information and the responses are not going to be analyzed. But what happens is these push polls become a source for the composite results of an organization like Real Clear Politics. And what they do is they enter those averages that are cited by these various push polls into a composite. And that is what is used, as I said, by Real Clear Politics. And like I say, honestly, it's political telemarketing. It's disingenuous. It's not scientific at all. So, for example, you get results on some of these polls, like the congressional generic ballot, which actually is an actual poll, and it will, and this happened, this isn't recent, but it definitely happened. It reported the Democrats up by 5% in 8 out of 10 of the polls. And yet this was barely reported at all. So in other words, the media, well, they're basically lying to you folks. They are giving a greater emphasis to some information in derogation to other information. And this that I talked to you about just now, about the congressional generic ballot, is really a good example of that, which is why this is something that we're going to go to in this segment. So given what I've explained about this, and when you see a situation in an election where it's this close, and I was just reading an article in New York Times the other day by David Brooks, who said, and this was also echoed by Bill Maher recently, that we're basically in the same place in November of 2022 that we were in on January 6th or January 7th of 2021. And this is like going back to this and just doing this commentary on what they said at that time. Nothing has changed, or very, very little has changed. The nation is still divided, basically along the same lines. In fact, something that's really weird is that among those people who believe that Trump won the 2020 election and that it was actually stolen from him and that there was fraud, that number has actually gone up 3%. So, in other words, given the methods and given the fact that it's a static situation, as I said, things have not really changed since January 7th, 2021. And if it's this close, the results can't be trusted. So, okay, so how do these polls get going? How do they get to be included in something like a composite, like Real Clear Politics? When you have a poll, you start a poll, you have to get financed, and in order to keep financed, you have to be respectable. You can't be radical. Otherwise, you won't get included in the composite, in the averages. So what do you do next? You pretend accuracy and wait until you get closer to the election, and that's when you go for the shark, so to speak, and you actually come out, or can be seen to come out, and not have people know what side it is that you actually favor. Now, interesting, Norman Ornstein, a fellow emeritus at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute, and because it's the American Enterprise Institute is why I say this is really interesting, because this is like the enemy telling on itself. In other words, you wouldn't expect this coming out of the American Enterprise Institute. And he was interviewed, and he confirmed the foregoing observations that I just made. And one of the things he emphasized is that the system is being undermined, and it's the Republicans that are doing it. It's not both sides. It's the fault of the Republican Party, and what this means is that the polls are deeply flawed. Now, this is complicated by the media, and you may have heard me talk about this before, and I certainly have not changed my mind, and we'll be talking about it again. But basically, you have the 3 C's of the media. Number 1, corrupt. Number 2, controlled. Number 3, corporate. And you may have probably heard for a long time now people complain about the media, but what I want to point out is that the media is owned by corporations. These corporations have to make money for their shareholders. And by the way, when I speak about this, I'm not even talking about the oligarchs who control the media. Let's just talk about this aspect of it. These corporations have to make money for their shareholders, and they have to pursue a plan of action that is calculated to make money for their shareholders and increase the value of the shares, and may be able to give a dividend to shareholders. Now, what does this mean? Well, for one thing, it means that the journalism suffered. When you're motivated by earning a dollar, everything else kind of pales in comparison, and as a consequence, the ontology of the media stinks. The epistemology of the media stinks. They lack moral compass. They lack moral fiber. They engage in a kind of collective hysteria. They are, to use a technical term, schlemiels. That's a Yiddish word. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. They're schlemiels. They're knuckleheads. They're chowderheads. They're knotheads. They're not powerful, independent thinkers. They lack intellectual rigor. They lack epistemological clarity. And as I said, their ontology stinks also. And what about the people who are actually writing the news, the reporters? The situation I just talked about is actually complicated by the fact that these reporters are essentially conformists who are engaged in what you've probably heard called groupthink. I think that was coined by George Orwell in his book 1984. And what do they care about? Well, a lot of them care about ratings. They probably think that their viewers are going to come back if they hear that the Democrats are losing. But in saying this, they provide an analysis so that the viewers become engaged and fearful and think to themselves, I have to come back every day. And I have to come back every day because I have to watch the show every day. So what's the conclusion to derive from this? It's all about ratings. Then there's the issue of taxes. You have to realize that the Republican Party brings corporate tax cuts and tax favor to the corporate holders of the shares of these media companies. This dovetails with what I was talking about before, with how these media companies have to make a dollar for themselves and for their shareholders. Once again, I'm not even talking about the issue of oligarchy. We're going to talk about that later, probably in another show. And it may come as a surprise to you. You may never have thought this way before now, but I'm going to tell you, when you add this to the mix, this is just not a difficult thing to figure out who it is that they're going to favor. So in other words, if you get the Republicans in office, you're going to get a freak show. You're going to get Marjorie Taylor Greene. You're going to get Gosar. You're going to get Cawthorn. You're going to get Boebert, if she can make it through the election. You're going to get Graham, Lindsey Graham. And you're going to get the head grifter individual number one, namely Donald Trump. He's going to be there also. And so you're going to get all of these freaks. And that's entertaining to watch. And once again, that's ratings. Whereas if you have the Democrats, you're going to get more constructive and critical government-based rule. And that's, boring. And the news media are not reporting the things that the democratically controlled Congress have done, which are significant and represent governing, and not this freak show, as I said, that you see from the groups that control the Republican Party. And that's a key comment that I'm making here. Listen to it again. The groups that control the Republican Party. Remember that, learn it, live it, you'll be tested on it. And yet, this is not much reported at all. But you can guarantee that the freak show will be in the news. You can guarantee it. And they have been in the news. And they have dominated. And the reason why they dominate is because people tune in. People read these things. People get excited about these things in derogation to the good government that the Democrats have actually done in the past, 3 or 4 years now. Then there's the question of bribery. There's the question of international money coming from God knows where. Certainly the Russians, certainly the Chinese, certainly other nations that are hostile to the interests of the United States, or who want to influence the voters to do the things that they secretly want to see the United States do, regardless of what this is. But mostly, it is those who are hostile to the interests of the United States. For example, it's a no-brainer. It's absolutely a no-brainer that Putin, for example, would want to influence voters to elect people in the Republican Party who stated that they questioned the expenditures to support Ukraine. You see this literally happening now. This is a no-brainer. This is not hard to figure out, and he's doing it in Europe too. But once again, that's Putin. Putin is ex-KGB. He's basically a criminal. All of those oligarchs in Russia are criminals. Once KGB, goes the old saying, always KGB. They are masters of what the Russian word is disinformatia, but I'm sure you can tell that the English derivation is disinformation, propaganda. They're masters at it. Putin is a master at it. And once KGB, always KGB. Once criminal, always criminal. And this is, like I said, this is a no-brainer. It's just not hard to figure out. You just have to open your mind and give a place for this and orient yourselves against the freak show, like I said, that is pouring out of the airwaves on all sides and surrounding you and trying to influence your vote, trying to distract you, trying to dissuade you. So hopefully this gives you some information to give you a greater understanding, which is exactly what it is. And this is what we like to do here at PB&J, so that you can look at these things in a different light, have a different view, and have more influence in your own discussions with other people about these things.